On a typical late morning at the International Departure Terminal of Incheon Airport, the scene gradually became more active as the clock approached midday, with several local media outlets already positioning their cameras near the main entrance leading to the immigration counters, signaling the anticipated departure of one of South Korea's most prominent celebrities. Suga appeared quietly, dressed in a dark premium outdoor windbreaker, wearing a white medical mask that concealed most of his face, and large pale gray headphones covering both ears. His longer hair, which had grown back neatly following his military service, was partially hidden beneath a simple black beanie, reinforcing the impression that he preferred to avoid attention. Nevertheless, his presence quickly drew the focus of a number of reporters who had been waiting for over an hour, trailing him closely with rolling cameras and extended microphones, walking briskly to match his steady and unhurried pace. As he moved forward, voices from the reporters began to rise, attempting to elicit a comment from the rapper regarding the current state of HYBE, which had recently come under scrutiny due to investigations by authorities into the company's internal management. Suga, however, offered no response whatsoever, neither quickening nor slowing his stride, maintaining a calm and consistent demeanor as he occasionally glanced toward the airport staff directing traffic for diplomats and celebrities. No visible change in expression could be detected from behind his mask, nor any body language indicating irritation or surprise. He seemed fully prepared for this environment, likely anticipating the situation from the moment his vehicle entered the terminal area. A few HYBE staff members walked slightly behind him, maintaining a respectful distance while keeping him within sight, without intervening or preventing the press from making their attempts. Despite reporters raising their voices in hopes of gaining a reaction, Suga remained entirely composed, avoiding any eye contact or acknowledgement, focusing solely on the designated VIP passenger path. As he neared the passport control gate, an airport official greeted him politely and swiftly guided him into the priority immigration lane without unnecessary physical gestures or interruptions. The moment was swiftly captured by several photojournalists, though none managed to extract a quote or meaningful expression from the artist, who preserved complete silence for the 2-minute walk from the entrance to the immigration checkpoint. There were no pauses, no nods, no refusals, just a presence that was both calm and deliberate, sending a clear message that he was there only to fulfill his travel plans, not to provide commentary. After disappearing from the camera's view, some reporters were seen comparing notes to determine whether they had captured any usable footage or gestures, but it appeared that none had succeeded in capturing anything beyond Suga's composed and wordless appearance. The interaction ended in total quiet, leaving behind a space for public interpretation that, in the absence of any statement, could only rest on the visible reality that Suga simply intended to leave without saying a word. The atmosphere around the terminal gradually returned to its usual rhythm after Suga's silent passage through immigration, with some of the reporters deciding to pack up their equipment while others lingered briefly, reviewing the footage they had just taken, though most seemed to acknowledge that the encounter yielded minimal content beyond visual documentation. Meanwhile, inside the secured area of the airport, Suga was seen briefly by a few commercial passengers near one of the VIP lounges, maintaining the same reserved demeanor, now seated alone with his headphones still on, looking down at his phone as he waited for boarding time. There was no entourage surrounding him, no signs of conversation or interaction with airport staff beyond the formalities of check-in and security, and no indication that he was willing to engage with anyone in the public space. His presence remained low-key, even among those who recognized him but chose not to approach out of respect or hesitance. Several passengers nearby who whispered quietly about his identity eventually went back to their own routines, sensing clearly that this was not a moment for fan engagement. The boarding announcement for his flight came roughly 30 minutes later, prompting him to stand and make his way to the gate with the same pace and silence he had maintained since his arrival. The airline staff greeted him courteously, checked his documents, and allowed him to board first along with other first-class passengers, with Suga offering only a slight nod of acknowledgement without breaking the composed stillness that had defined his entire presence at the airport. As the aircraft began to prepare for takeoff, it became increasingly evident that his journey was not intended to be marked by any public statement or media interaction, but simply as a necessary movement amidst the ongoing discourse surrounding HYBE. While outside the airport, the conversation continued through news articles and online posts that speculated on his silence, Inside the aircraft, Suga had already settled into his seat, reclined slightly, and resumed his digital scrolling, now shielded entirely from the public gaze. Throughout the flight, he remained quiet, with no cabin staff reporting any unusual requests or behaviors, reinforcing the impression that his approach to the situation was not reactive but deeply intentional, choosing distance and composure rather than confrontation or commentary. Upon arrival at the destination, which was not disclosed officially by HYBE but assumed to be tied to a previously scheduled work agenda, he exited the aircraft discreetly, assisted briefly by local ground staff who ensured his passage through immigration was smooth and uninterrupted. Again, there were no visible signs of a security detail or any grand reception, just a single van waiting outside the arrivals terminal with darkened windows, into which he quietly stepped without pause. Observers at the airport who later confirmed seeing him described the same calm, emotionally neutral behavior as in Seoul. No drama, no avoidance, no attempt to hide, but simply the absence of engagement. For many, the most striking detail from that entire day was not something that was said or done, but the complete consistency of his demeanor from the moment he stepped out of his car at Incheon until the door of the van closed behind him at his arrival point. It painted a picture of someone navigating intense public scrutiny not by fighting it, but by moving through it unshaken, choosing silence as a strategy rather than a reaction. In a media climate often dominated by statements, clarifications, and performances of response, Suga's refusal to speak became its own form of message, clear not in words, but in restraint, leaving audiences and commentators to reflect on the significance of presence without commentary, and the space that silence occupies in the ever louder world of celebrity. Later that same day, as media outlets began publishing reports and short video clips capturing Suga's silent passage through Incheon Airport, the coverage focused less on what was seen and more on what was notably absent. Any verbal response or engagement from the artist regarding HYBE's current legal entanglements. News platforms, entertainment blogs, and fan communities circulated still images showing his masked face, the discreet Arc'teryx logo on his jacket, and the pale headphones that had become symbolic of his physical and emotional distance from the crowd around him. Analysts and cultural commentators began to weigh in subtly, offering interpretations of his body language, some calling it a form of dignified silence, others suggesting it was a deliberate stance of detachment from corporate affairs that he, as an individual artist, was not obligated to address publicly. However, beyond the speculations, what remained evident was that Suga had managed to pass through an otherwise volatile media moment without adding fuel to any narrative. Within HYBE itself, no official statement was released in response to either his departure or the way media attention had surged around it, and this lack of commentary from both sides further cemented the tone of quiet professionalism. While other idols might have smiled or nodded or even issued brief reassurances under similar circumstances, Suga's insistence on keeping his energy directed inward rather than outward seemed to resonate differently with each audience. Among fans, particularly ARMY, his approach was met with a mix of concern and admiration, with many praising his commitment to maintaining boundaries between personal movement and public expectation, while others speculated about the emotional toll such exposure might be taking on him. Still, the core of the reaction remained grounded. People saw what they saw: a man arriving, walking, waiting, boarding, and leaving, all without fuss or drama. That evening, the broader entertainment media cycle began to shift toward other topics, allowing the story to naturally fade without unnecessary amplification. Social media conversations around the event declined in volume, replaced by lighter content and scheduled promotions unrelated to the incident. Behind the scenes, staff close to HYBE's travel coordination shared with select industry contacts that everything had gone smoothly, that Suga's departure had followed standard procedures, and that there were no disruptions caused by the presence of media. This kind of logistical confirmation, though not part of any official press release, helped reinforce the idea that the airport scene, while noteworthy in timing, had not derailed any part of the artist's personal or professional agenda. In fact, the sheer normalcy of it, the early arrival, the measured walk, the efficient boarding, reminded many of how much of celebrity life is built on routine, even when external circumstances are turbulent. The controlled pacing of his actions, paired with his consistent nonverbal cues, suggested a level of experience and self-discipline that comes not only from years in the public eye but from a deeper understanding of when to speak and when to stay still. As the flight continued toward its destination and media buzz slowly receded, the image of Suga walking past reporters without a word became less a symbol of conflict or defiance and more a reflection of a broader human instinct to preserve calm in moments of pressure. Rather than framing the day as a missed opportunity for statement, many began to see it as a subtle reminder that presence itself, when managed with care and clarity, can carry meaning even without a single word spoken. By the following morning, the brief media cycle surrounding Suga's silent appearance at the airport had largely run its course, with entertainment news programs and online platforms moving on to other topics ranging from music chart releases to upcoming drama premieres, leaving behind only a few residual mentions in commentary threads and fan discussions. Meanwhile, Suga's itinerary remained undisclosed, and no official confirmation regarding his destination or purpose of travel had been issued by HYBE or any related management entity, consistent with the group's long-established policy of maintaining discretion around non-promotional movements. Despite this, several international fans began sharing unverified sightings at major transit hubs abroad, though none were accompanied by images or recordings substantial enough to draw renewed media attention. Throughout the day, conversations within ARMY communities gradually shifted, focused to other members' activities, acknowledging that Suga's absence of comment was likely intentional and rooted in personal or professional boundaries that fans had long learned to respect. Within industry circles, the event became a subtle reference point for how artists could navigate uncomfortable public moments with minimal disruption, with some PR observers quietly noting that silence, when combined with calm physical presence and lack of escalation, could be more effective than carefully worded statements or brief sound bites. Meanwhile, inside HYBE, operational routines continued, with internal teams reportedly working through scheduled activities and business meetings as planned, with no indication that Suga's departure or the surrounding media attention had prompted any shift in agenda. That evening, a few entertainment news anchors briefly mentioned his airport appearance during their nightly segments, describing it as a composed transition amid turbulent news and an example of professionalism under pressure, before quickly moving on to the next headline. In South Korea's broader celebrity culture, known for its sensitivity to public scrutiny and expectations of responsiveness, Suga's choice to remain silent stood out not as an act of rebellion but as a form of personal discipline, an approach that quietly challenged the assumption that public figures must always be prepared to speak on matters beyond their scope or control. Fans and neutral observers alike began to reflect on how often celebrities are placed in situations where their presence alone is treated as an invitation for accountability, even when the circumstances are unrelated to their individual actions. In this context, Suga's decision to walk through the airport, fully visible yet emotionally reserved, seemed to signal a preference for dignity over defense, choosing grounded action over rhetorical performance. As the news cycle continued to shift, the memory of his quiet passage became a reference point in discussions about healthy boundaries, self-preservation, and the evolving expectations placed upon artists in high-pressure industries. Though fleeting, the image of him with his headphones on, looking forward as cameras followed closely behind, remained in circulation across fan timelines not because of what it revealed, but because of what it allowed people to consider: the possibility that silence can be more than absence, that it can represent a firm yet gentle line drawn between self and spectacle. By the end of that 24-hour cycle, the moment had folded into the larger rhythm of celebrity life in South Korea. Noticeable, briefly discussed, then respectfully passed over, leaving behind a muted but memorable impression of how one artist chose to carry himself amid noise not of his making, without resistance, without retreat, and without a single word.